This lecture is going to cover the principles of perspective drawing. We're going to talk about some of the principles and theory. This is Francis Ching's Architectural Graphics. It's a great resource for various drawing types in architecture. It covers general, drafting rules of thumb, multi-view drawings, various examples, perspectives, orthographic views, paraline drawings. Really great resource for this. So I'm going to be taking a lot of the information out of this and applying it to a drawing. We're going to do this and create an example of an interior space, all drawn from perspective and showing how to create a compelling perspective that seems like it's created from the way our eye perceives the space. So this is geared towards architecture, but applies to general perspective drawings. So in this chapter, Ching talks about how perspective can apply to any number of drawing types. The term perspective most often brings to mind the drawing system of linear perspective, which is a technique for describing three-dimensional volumes and spatial relationships on a two-dimensional surface by means of lines that converge as they recede into the depth of a drawing. So it depicts how a construction or environment might appear to the eye of an observer looking in a specific direction from a particular point or vantage point. So this is a great diagram explaining the way that we observe an object, and it's like projecting that object onto a two-dimensional plane. So we're able to recreate this plane on a sheet of paper, for example. So there's different types of perspective. There's 1 point, 2 point, 3 point perspective. We're going to draw an example of 1 point perspective today, where there's one vanishing point along a horizon line. That horizon line is established by really the viewer and where the photo is taken, or where the eye of the observer is standing. So considering where that is, if you're standing in a room, figure that your eye level is anywhere from 5 to 6 feet, depending on your height. So you want that height of your horizon line to be at approximately that same height. So establishing that is really the first thing that we're going to do, is kind of understanding where the eye is and where the vanishing point is in the space. So if you're standing in the middle of a room and looking at one of the walls, there's going to be one vanishing point. Looking at some of the other types of perspective. So 1 point perspective, again, imagine you're looking at a box and you're seeing all the edges of that box vanishing to one single point. It's going to look like this. If you're looking at the corner of a box, this is 2 point perspective. There's two vanishing points. So you're looking at the corner, not the face of the object. And then 3 point perspective, this is, you'll see this in views of a skyscraper or looking up at a really tall building. You'll actually notice that it's not just receding in 2 points, it's receding, the lines are receding vertically as well. So it's skewed this way, kind of a fisheye effect. And so you'll see various perspective views in architecture when we're depicting design work, but it's also an important concept to understand when you're drawing from sight. And so that's the purpose of this tutorial, is to look at how we can depict an image from sight and create construction lines and create a scene that is compelling and is realistic. So when considering this, we want to realize, the most important aspect of this is to draw what you see, not what you think you see. So it's a constant battle of convincing our brain to look at what's actually there versus our knowledge of that object outside of what we're seeing. So that's a constant, I think, struggle, but it's one that we need to be conscious of and constantly look at the actual proportion of the geometry, the imperfections in it, rather than just trying to draw a idealized version of it. So it's important to kind of set up construction lines and set up a grid. There's, this book goes into a lot of detail into constructing that. We're just going to cover the basics here in this video, so I'm not going to dive too deep into proper angles for constructing this. But really, when you think about it, it's how the eye perceives space. And a one-point perspective actually assumes that you only have one eye open. We're not, typically looking at life that way. We have two eyes, so the perspective is slightly different, but it's enough that a one-point perspective and drawing this way will work well, and it'll convince the viewer that this is drawn in perspective. Okay, so we're going to do a sample drawing here. We're going to look at some examples. The photo that we're going to use is this image of Union Station in Los Angeles. So standing in the middle of this space, we want to be able to construct a perspective that matches what we're seeing. So it's, again, a constant battle. It's a constant struggle to see, okay, what am I actually looking at versus what does my mind pick up? And, I'm going to start with pencil. I like to use micron pens of various thickness. These will do a great job in kind of highlighting and ink liner for the pencil marks that I make. Various line weights. It's good to start with lighter line weights and kind of work your way into heavier line weights as the drawing progresses. And the line weight also has to do with how far something is. If something's close to your vantage point, then it's going to have a thicker line weight. Things far away can have lighter line weights. So the first thing we want to do is establish where the perspective is taken. So we're going to look at eye level and kind of establish that the horizon line is somewhere here. We want to get the massing of this correct. We want to make sure we can fit everything on the page. So that's an important thing to establish. So our horizon line, assuming we create this to, I'm going to make this a lot smaller on the page so I have room to work. But assuming that's the horizon line, I want to set maybe the back of that room to maybe here. And then establishing kind of the extents of our view is also important. So I'm just going to draw vertical lines to kind of create the extents of that view. And then thinking proportionally, right? How much space is below the horizon line versus above? I actually have a lot more space above the horizon line. So I'm going to establish the bottom of this image around here. And the top is going to be somewhere, it looks like that's at least, it's about double. So I'm going to do this. So this is pretty much the extent of the image. And I'm drawing these just as light construction lines to establish the extents of the drawing. And that's important because, again, you don't want to be drawing something that ends up off of the page. So we want to be clear with what we're showing. And again, it's about getting the vanishing point correct. So this is approximately in the middle. We won't, worry about that too much, but I'm going to place this in the middle. That'll be our vanishing point. And then from there, all of the lines in this drawing are receding. So we can start with the vertical line of the kind of ridge beam that runs down the middle of the library. So that's there. Going off to the sides, and this is just below kind of the top of this view, we're going to have a line that creates the top of the wall. Again, these can notice that, this is, since this horizon line is horizontal and everything is single line, this is single point perspective. I'm just going to draw a horizontal here. That's going to be the line that I connect for this construction line. And again, I'm establishing the top of wall and the beginning of the ceiling here. Trying to do my best to match proportionally what I'm seeing. And it's never going to be perfect. I had great advice from a professor at USC, Graham Moreland, who said, looking at drawings and, if you find a mistake, just say, you can't win them all. So I thought that was really good advice. There's never going to be a perfect drawing, so just keep going. So the same thing applies here. I want to figure out how wide kind of that center walkway is. So that's maybe something about there. So I'm going to do this to establish that, and it stops. And again, I'm just setting up kind of the perspective lines here. These are construction lines, so they're meant to be kind of light, and it's okay if they're not perfect at the moment. So I want to establish the bottom of the wall. And again, whenever I do that, I want to figure out proportionally how much space this is actually taking up. So I'm going to figure that puts me, maybe the corner of the wall is about there. And doing the same thing on the other side. And, we also have to think when we're establishing this perspective, things recede as they fall back in space. So notice these windows are going to be larger the closer they are to us, and then get smaller and smaller. And again, we could do this a lot more rationally. You can set up a grid and follow more mathematical rules to do that. I'm going to go based on what we're seeing and proportionally what the space is doing. Before I can establish the window size, I want to figure out where that end of the wall is. So figure out where the corner of this room is first. So to do that, always find reference points. So in the image, I want to come in maybe about here, because that's about halfway or so, a little more than halfway along this path. That's kind of establishing our vertical. So if I were to do that, so that's kind of establishing the top of the wall here. And again, I'm just kind of eyeballing where I saw this line continuing down on the walkway here. Okay, and so creating a horizontal line again, so using some of the rules that we've set up here. This wall is then going to come down like that. So we're just kind of establishing the construction lines here and giving ourselves rules that we can work within. I'm going to draw a line here even though it's not actually seen in this view, but it'll help us with everything else. Okay, so I'm creating basically the outlines that'll help add detail, and the more construction lines you add, the easier it'll be to continue with the drawing and add detail when needed. So we have our vanishing point, horizon line, and we're establishing these construction lines. So, one thing that we can do, and again, I want to mass out the generic drawing first and then add more detail, add windows and things like that. So from here we can establish that, let's say the center of this wall, if I were to take from here to here and just kind of draw a line down the center, that puts us about at the edge of this window that's closer to us. So that's something that we can keep in mind. I also, want to figure out the height of that window. I'll put it about there. So if that's the height of our window, and we still have some space between the window and the edge of wall, it's maybe 50-50 from there. So I'm going 50-50 from here to here to establish that line. And the more you work in architecture, the more drawings you do, the more you'll realize, okay, remember to figure out massing and scale and proportion as you're drawing. It can get out of hand pretty quickly if you're not paying attention to proportion. So this line looks like a solid wall, so that's above the horizon line, so that's doing this. Let's keep going though. So we've established where this window is approximately. We also want to establish where the next window is. And so that we have a solid wall. We have a window here. And that's also a little less than 50%. And so by establishing this, you'll notice that this window, that width is a lot shorter than that. So that's okay. We're kind of guessing how far that window is receding as far as scale. So we could do the same thing for the other side. I think before I do that, I want to mass out this ceiling so we can understand the beams and joists that are occurring here. So we have this ridge beam, we have beams extending out, or girders extending to the wall, and then joists in between them. So that's something that we want to establish. So again, larger, the closer they are to you. So, we can see to the right of this window that there is the massing of kind of the ornamentation of this. One thing, so that's the top of the window. So the top of the wall is actually up here. So that's something to keep in mind. We're gonna maybe establish that about here. Want to get the proportions correct. Again, this is all just kind of by sight, so it's not going to be perfect. And so I'm going to choose a spot maybe about here for that beam to connect. And this is going to be a mirror image over here. And on this side, again, if we just draw kind of a light horizontal line, we can establish where that endpoint is here. Draw this again to the vanishing point, keeping that size approximately the same, and then creating another, connecting the dots here. And again, that phrase, draw what you see, not what you think you see. So it's not going to be a perfect image. There's going to be a chandelier here, and that'll cover this, but we're still just setting up the view. So we actually see that there's a horizontal element here, this, that we can see the thickness of that beam, so that's going to be drawn here. I want to get that proportion right, get the thickness of it correct. So these elements are doing this. And again, I don't want to go too far into detail here, but I'm just kind of massing everything out. So I'm looking at the depth, kind of the bottom of the beam, and comparing that to the top. It's about the same, maybe a little less. So I'm kind of doing this. That line is going to also recede here. So again, these are just construction lines, so it's not going to be perfect. So just establishing the thickness of this, and this is going to recede. And it's not going to go all the way down there. We can erase that later. So I come to here, and just looking at the image, that's going to recede a little bit more than what I drew. So it's okay to use the eraser once in a while. Again, these are construction lines, so I could still just go over this if needed. Okay. All right, so creating this perspective, we want to also establish the other beams here too. And so before I go to draw that line, I want to establish, okay, where is this next one? It's about halfway down here to the next beam. And then from there, it's about halfway down, maybe a little more than halfway to the next one before we hit the wall. Okay, so establishing this is important because this is going to get our proportions correct. These lines are parallel, so we're going to keep that kind of same angle. And this is looking good. We've kind of hit between the windows. That's where the loads of this roof are actually falling, so that's good. It's not ideal when you end up in a drawing and things seem to be off and don't line up. Actually, this isn't great. And here we want this to still have some room out here. So we're gonna have to adjust this a little bit. I'm gonna bring this line up, I think. Yeah. Okay, so we want this line to be approximately right here. Still keeping that parallel. That seems too high. And the bottom of these should also line up, so those should align. And the width of this gets smaller as we recede into space, so kind of understanding that. So again, we can add detail as we go, but here is that second to the end. And again, I know the height of this because of this vanishing point line, or this perspective line here. Okay, and then continuing with the massing, we'll do the windows on the left as well. And again, here's our horizon line. We have a line kind of going up like that. The more you draw, the better you get at this. It's, you know, I don't sketch as much as I'd like to, but this is what I have time for. So just drawing these verticals here, establishing where that window is, and I have to think, okay, where's the window itself versus the actual punch out for it. So I'll just draw the punch out of the window. So this actually goes below the horizon line. It's just furniture is blocking that view. Same thing here. This is going to get between those two windows, or between the two beams. And then at this level, I can say, okay, this is our kind of the white edge detail. And here, again, notice that there's more white on this side than the other because we're seeing the window three-dimensionally. Really thin edge here. So this kind of white ribbon continues. So we can do the same thing on the other side. We can also establish the location of these chandeliers. So I have the top of this chandelier approximately here. We want to establish kind of where the bottom kind of bell of this thing is. So just past the bottom of that rake wall. Oh, that's something that we haven't drawn yet. We have the rake wall here. Probably a little more space above it than what I'm giving it here, but can't win them all. Okay, so establishing this. I'm just massing this for now. I'm not going to go into too much detail. Same place over here. This whole room is symmetrical. So if I were to just draw a horizontal line, puts us here, vertical. This line doesn't exist, neither does that. As I'm doing this, I'm constantly looking up at the image or at my subject matter. You don't want to get caught up with just drawing from what you think the image looks like or what the object looks like. It can be very deceptive to just do that, and then you realize the whole thing is off and it just doesn't have the realism that you expect. And in the same way, these chandeliers, if we know they're parallel, right, we can actually draw some vanishing point lines for these two. So I know that if, assuming it's in the same place on that wall or on the ceiling, this top of the chandelier is going to be right at the edge of my drawing. And assuming that chandelier is the same size, we can draw another construction line, establishing the bottom of that as well, or at least where this tip is going to be here. So we can establish a vertical and establish the bottom. And here with this chandelier, it's a little bit more skewed in perspective. We can see more of the bottom than we can here. So this is going to be a larger chandelier. We can establish the edge of that too. So again, matching this edge, establishing a vertical. And continuing to look at the image itself, it's skewed. So the top of this actually comes up here, and it's actually doing something like this. So doing my best to draw what I'm seeing, not what I think I'm seeing. It's hard enough to draw circles on their own, but having it skewed like this is really difficult. Same thing over here. Assuming we're in the center of the room, that puts our chandelier about there. Vertical line. Yeah, that's about right. Bottom of chandelier. And again, this image that I'm looking at has a very, it's a wide angle, so it's creating this kind of skewed perspective that you wouldn't see in real life, but that's the image.